Thank you, everyone. So we're going to start with meditation. And I invite you all to just become still, centered and relaxed. If you're comfortable doing so, close your eyes. And just bring your attention to your breath. Just paying attention to the process of your breathing. Inhaling, they are moving into your body, expanding your chest. And then exhaling, the air coming back out again. And with each successive breath, just allow that rhythm to become a little deeper. Feel yourself ground to the spot where you're seated. And take some comfort in the truth that you have no other obligation at this moment other than to be present. Breathing in, filling your body with the nourishment of oxygen, and then gently releasing that breath. And we allow the breath to remind us of the omnipresence of the Spirit. The Spirit that infuses us with life, that animates every fiber of our being. And in the spirit of today's daily word, I invite you to bring your attention to your third eye. That space between your two eyes, that's the seat of vision, of imagination. Of course, we know in unity that imagination is one of the 12 powers. And whatever your condition, current condition in life, just fix your attention on your third eye, that seat of imagination. And allow yourself to do a little daydreaming. And imagine yourself as the most loving, brilliant, powerful being that you've always desired to be. And through the power of your imagination, you consciously connect to the divine, to the presence of God, to God's absolute, ever-present, loving intention for you to manifest yourself as that fully loving, perfect, capable, powerful being here on earth. as you hold that vision of yourself in mind, you set up the cosmic conditions for that to truly manifest. And the beauty of this is that you need not go it alone. First and foremost, you have the omnipresence of the Spirit of God guiding you, supporting you, encouraging you every step of the way. And you have this community of souls gathered here as well as we support one another in consciousness during this time of meditation. And we see one another through the power of the third eye as the perfect, most loving, most powerful community of beings that we are individually and collectively. So let us take that idea and indeed that truth and hold it for a few moments in the silence. Very gently begin to bring your awareness fully back to your embodied self. Silently expressing gratitude for this time of conscious connection with God. Grateful for this time of conscious connection with one another in spirit and in truth. Bring your attention back to your breathing. Just follow the rhythm of your inhale and exhale. Feel the gravity of the earth fixing you on the spot where you're seated. And when you're ready, open your eyes, be here, and be aware right now. Good morning. It's good to be back. And I wanted to, there's another reason why Carol's here today. Actually, I invited her. So I wanted to recognize a good friend that we both have had over the years in the form of Reverend Richard Billings, who transitioned on February 18th of this year. And I knew I was going to talk about Richard back when Rita had asked me to speak today. And I thought, well, what would be the perfect Richard kind of talk to give today? And I thought something about the quantum power. Reverend Richard was a powerhouse of consciousness. So, and Richard's contributions continue to ripple forward. I mean, the fact that we're all here today.
Yes.
Right?
We wouldn't be here.
We wouldn't be here for
today
Reverend Richard.
in this room. Yeah. We'd be here But not in this room.
Yeah, we wouldn't be here together in this spot, in this place right now. And I want to talk about Richard, not just to hold him up on a pedestal as some divine sage that we all could admire, because Richard never wanted that, even for himself. I mean, Richard's lesson to everyone was that we all have the power of Christ consciousness inherent, and we can exercise that and use that. And I think Carol would attest to this, that every minister that he mentored, and every Unity teacher and every congregant had that and has that power. So it's an appropriate topic. And Richard was known, I'll just give you a little bit of background as well, and Carol, you can add anything I miss about this. He was kind of considered, his nickname was the Unity Pope. He had been in the movement for so long. He mentored Carol, of course, and he mentored so many ministers in the Midwest region, and I imagine around the country. There's so many churches that exist today because of Reverend Richard. Richard has a really deep legacy in Unity as well. He was friends with May Rowland, who succeeded Myrtle Fillmore as the director of Silent Unity. He was a friend of James Dillett Freeman, Unity Poet Laureate. He also was friends with Catherine Ponder, a prosperity teacher. Eric Butterworth was a friend and confidant of Richard's. Johnny Coleman, and many, many, many others. So any of the big names in Unity that you've heard, Richard knew them in one way or another. And I feel really grateful that I had a lot of one-on-one time with Richard as well. I attended Unity of Oak Park for a few years when I lived in Chicago, and was on the board there for a while, was a chaplain there for a while. So I was very fortunate to have spent a lot of one-on-one time with Richard in his office at Unity of Oak Park. So I wouldn't be here talking to you all today if it weren't for him as well. The church that I originally attended in Chicago was Unity Church of Peace, which was in the Lakeview, Lincoln Park area. And that church was started by Reverend Kent Lederer, which you may know Kent, because you knew Mike Matoyne, and Mike Matoyne was a mentor of Kent's. And Richard, of course, supported Unity Church of Peace. And so when I came into Unity, very quickly got connected to everybody. So Richard Billings practiced the quantum power of the Christ consciousness. And through the power of his contribution, the Unity movement has continued to grow. So, when I was writing the talk, I was thinking, well, Richard was such a powerful demonstrator, like someone who truly lived what he talked about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just, from 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there's a story that you may have heard, Carol, about Unity of Oak Park. It's in a historic building, if you've never been there, designed by a contemporary of Frank Lloyd Wright. So it's a former mansion that the Unity Church Park bought. And it was not without its financial challenges. And their story goes that Richard would sit in what is now the Richard Billings Chapel in that church, which is the old parlor, and he would meditate on just visualizing like streams of money flowing in through the windows when the church was going through its financial challenges, and he would have this discipline of meditating, just money flowing in. And sure enough, the church became very prosperous. And it is probably one of the older Unity congregations. around today. It's I think going on 60 years. But that like I could see Richard. I mean, to hear that story, I was no surprise to me, because that's the kind of consciousness he practiced, and he truly believed that's what would happen. The power of his meditation, the power of his consciousness. So he understood the quantum power of consciousness and the quantum power of contribution. So Richard, much like I believe the Dalai Lama says that it's not enough just to go up on a mountain and pray or to meditate, that we have to bring it down, boots on the ground, in a practical way. And Richard spends a lot of time with boots on the ground, seeding churches, mentoring ministers and teachers. So he took into tangible action what he meditated on and what he preached. Now, you are all demonstrators as well, whether you realize it or not. And I'm reminded of the scripture where Jesus said, you know, these are the works that I do, but greater works shall you do. And it's true. And it's such a big idea as well. It's hard for us to kind of grasp at the moment. But if we look at the sum total of our lives and all that we've done and all the people that we've touched, I think we could see how that statement is indeed true. What you hold in mind produces after its kind. And in like the wake of something like The Secret, the movie The Secret from, I don't know, maybe 12, 15 years ago, there's this idea that what you hold in mind produces after its kind. So if you want a new car, just hold that in mind and it's going to pop up. Well, we could take a more mature view of that idea, because what you hold in mind produces after its kind. Yes, that can happen in the material world, but it's also beyond the material. What you hold in mind produces after its kind in terms of your attitude and way of being is perhaps even more important and more foundational. So it doesn't take much of a stretch to get in touch with, like if I wake up today and I'm just in a bad mood for whatever reason, and I just think to myself, well, this is a rotten day, and I've just gotten up, it's probably going to be a rotten day. I mean, I'm probably not going to have a good experience. Now, instead, if I wake up and maybe I'm not feeling so great, but I consciously shift my thinking, even if I tell myself, no, today can be and will be a good day, even if I don't fully believe in the moment, but if I start to set in motion my consciousness towards that, I begin to hold in mind a different idea. And I very slowly, intentionally can shift my own attitude. Again, I think this was something that Richard absolutely lived and preached and took out into his own ministry, and it was a big lesson for me as well, just to understand that what I hold in mind produces after its kind primarily through consciousness. What attitude I choose, what being I choose to have. And as I mentioned a moment ago, I think if we all ponder it, we realize that we have this exponential power to impact. So we don't have to have fame. And in this world, that's, like they say right now, the big difference with this generation versus a generation or two ago is that more people are obsessed with becoming famous because of all just the expansion of media and so forth. And be rest assured, you need not have fame or a large following or have written numbers of books in order to have an impact. Jesus said, you will do these things and greater things will you do. For the most part, Jesus had 12 guys following him most of his life, or most of his preaching life. And a lot of the other followers would come and go. They'd be challenged by the message, and they might fall out. So, most of his preaching life, Jesus had 12 guys, and kind of at the end of it was 11, because one of them betrayed him.
Plus Mary Magdalene.
And Mary Magdalene, so there you go. And actually that's a really important point, because at the end of the whole thing, on the day of the resurrection, it was the group of women that saw Jesus first. Now, Jesus never worried about actually being famous. He struggled with it. There's a scripture about going to Jerusalem, and he's being challenged. He said, well, you know, you're preaching all this stuff, you want to be known, go to Jerusalem, you know, for the Passover. And Jesus says, no, you know, it's not mine to do. He ultimately does go. But there's like, it's almost this scripture, the way I interpret it, there's this internal struggle. Because the challenge to him in the scripture was, well, you know, you're famous. Spread your fame. Now, Jesus never wrote a word on paper either. This is the other thing. As far as we know, there's nothing that is in Jesus' hand. Nothing that he's ever written. Everything that we know about Jesus and everything that we've ever read has been written by other people. So there's this. So the point I want to make with that is that, you know, in terms of seeking fame or notoriety or impact, we already have that ability. We're already doing it. Whether or not we ever write a book, do a YouTube video, are interviewed on a TV program, or ever in a movie or whatever. So Jesus' impact, the quantum power of his contribution, was really based in consciousness. Because some way or other he knew that even preaching to the core, the small core group that he had, under incredibly impossible conditions. I mean, this is the Roman Empire. There wasn't a whole lot that itinerant rabbi who no one knew about, like what impact could he possibly have? It was all hail Caesar. But he understood the quantum power of his contribution that was based in consciousness. And it's evidenced in the spread of Christianity around the world today. Now, there are different flavors of Christianity, and some are more extreme than others. Fortunately, I feel we're like in one of the most powerful, loving forms of Christianity here in Unity. But what a road, you know, what a road that's been traveled to get here. And all because this one person had an impact that continued to ripple through the centuries. And this is beyond Jesus. I mean, we can take the term Christ consciousness and more generally. Because we look at spiritual leaders like the Buddha. And there's so much of the Buddha's teachings that are just completely worldwide available. And it said the Buddha never wrote anything either. Everything we have documented about the Buddha was written by his followers. In the Islam tradition, Muhammad, the poet Rumi, of course, Myrtle Fillmore, Gandhi, the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, all practitioners, practicers of Christ consciousness, all had this ripple impact. I mean, Mother Teresa just wanted to teach kids. But that was, she saw a need that needed to be met, and wasn't looking for fame and wasn't looking to be popular in the media. Paramahansa Yogananda does a lot of, had done a lot of interpretation of Christ's teachings in the Hindu tradition, and deeply revered the Christ consciousness that he felt endowed with and that he practiced. Martin Luther King and, of course, Barbara Marx Hubbard, who I have the pleasure of working with. And Kathy's actually in that program with me, the Evolutionary Ambassador Academy. So Christ consciousness is not just about Christianity. It's really about the spiritual power we're endowed with, and that we can access, become in touch with, practice, and expand truly at will. So how further does this relate to you? Well, I would ask, where and how are you showing up? And the way that you do that, the where and the how you show up, is more often than not attributable to an organic process. It's actually rather effortless. Give you an example in my own life. So this work I'm doing with Barbara, it starts a couple years ago when I got linked up with Humanities team. And I was attracted to its conscious business class, the conscious business enterprise. And I thought, okay, sounds good. Let me take this. So I take this class a few years ago. And I was so moved by the message, the power of the movement, the conscious business movement, like to actually do business in the interest of good above all else, and not just in the interest of profit. So when I was done with the class, I raised my hand and said, I'd like to volunteer and help spread the word about this. So for about a year I volunteered. And then that led to being asked to present as a guest in the next class, just to do one small module on my conscious business experience. And then that ultimately led to me being offered the role to direct the program itself. It doesn't end there, because then that led to my being asked to support Barbara with some of her programming. Now, the Humanities team, we have this conscious business initiative, and Barbara with Marx Hubbard is doing work with us as well with Humanities team. They were two separate things. I actually hadn't worked with Barbara and on any of her previous programming at all. But then the call came one day that, Steve, we'd like you to actually be online with her on one of the modules, just to help direct some of the discussion. And kind of from there, I mean, the quantum leap was that I was instantly thrust into now co-creating a program with her. And if I go back to when I took the class the first time a few years ago, I would never have made the leap that was going to happen, in my mind. It was I never consciously planned it. And I never, it just wasn't on my conscious radar. But there was something cosmically happening that led me to that. So the choice I made in all that is to show up. That was really it. And then sort of Christ consciousness guides me through the rest of it. And it's true for all of you as well. So what I'd like you to do for a moment here is I'm going to lead you through a short meditation just to prove the quantum power of your contribution. Because you might be questioning it and saying, well, I'm kind of living everyday life, and maybe I'm not doing a lot of great things. It doesn't have to be great things. So let me take you through a little meditation. I invite you to close your eyes. And as you do that, just kind of do a scan of your life. You can start whatever point either comes to you or just go all the way back to maybe when you were a kid. And think of a person that impacted you, or a person that you impacted in some way. It could be a family member, it could be a friend, maybe somebody, just a neighbor, somebody in your neighborhood when you were growing up. If you weren't scouting, it might have been a peer, as a fellow student in school. Maybe throughout your career, somebody that you came across and had a profound experience with during your working life. In a seemingly ordinary context. And if you can identify that person, I invite you to think about an encouraging word that you gave to them or that they gave to you. And then further meditate on the resonance of those words. If you provided the encouraging word, can you imagine how that person was positively impacted? Whether they told it to you explicitly or whether they just went about their way feeling a little bit better about your encouragement. And then if you were the receiver of the encouraging word, what did it mean to you to be encouraged, to have somebody care enough to give you hope or to provide a little bit of happiness in the moment? And what was the ripple effect from there forward for you as the receiver of an encouraging word? And if you take nothing else from today's talk, I just invite you to make the connection between the positive thought, the positive attitude, let's say even the generative thought or the generative attitude. The connection between that and then the generative intention. And then from that to the generative word. And then from that to the potential for the ripple impact of that word upon your life and their life. We may not always know, indeed we won't know most of the time, the true ripple impacts of our encouraging words upon others. Rest assured that through the quantum power of your contribution, the quantum power of your encouraging word, that the ripple effects are profound. That in accordance with the grace of God, you and the other can only experience blessing. You and the other can only experience the absolute omnipresent good with which we are designed. And just take a nice deep breath into the power, the quantum power that you hold. Release it. And just silently express gratitude for the omnipresence of Christ consciousness working in you, through you, and indeed as you. And know that as well, God expresses gratitude to you for the embrace of this truth and for being both an agent and an angel of the good. So it is.